Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Share the adventures of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barlee.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. I'm Mike Roberts, and with me is Bill Barlee, our historian and storyteller. And today we're heading to the Northwest Territories in prior to 1905, extended a lot further south than it does now.
Sure, it went right into Alberta. Alberta was part of the Northwest Territories, so we're looking at a little town high in the Rockies, Mike, between Blairmore and Pincher Creek. Coal town, naturally, all that section in there. And of course, Blairmore is a famous coal town. Mm-hmm. And this town was called the town with a future. Frank, Northwest Territories, later became Frank, Alberta. Future was questionable.
Future was more than questionable, as you'll find out as we continue with Gold Trails and Ghost Towns right after these words. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barlee, and we're talking about Frank today, and this is coal country, that southern part of the Rockies in Canada.
Yeah, right up in that high country, right next to it, of course, is Blairmore, an old coal town. About 1900, a prospector comes out of Blairmore looking for a new find, prospecting as usual, looking for a good coal seam. Mm-hmm. Heads from Blairmore and gets into what we now call the Frank area, looks at a big mountain up there, and this is Turtle Mountain. Has a south peak and a north peak. Down at the base, he crosses the river, which is the Old Man River, now called the Crow's Nest River, and finds a seam of coal ranging from 3 feet to 9 feet. Figures he's got a real find. Goes down to Butte, Montana, interests a real wheeler dealer in Butte, Montana called H.L. Frank. He interests Frank so much that he comes up to see the seam. He is impressed. Right, he says, we'll start a coal company and we'll put the town right here. He picks a location for the town, and he said, we'll name the town, we'll name it Frank.
Very humble man.
Very humble man indeed.
First rate. And so this is 1901.
Yeah, about 1901 by now. And he starts this town. He has a gala opening. Railroad cars come in full of people, 900 people are there, and the town gets underway. This is the town with a future. It's well planned. And when you look at Frank at about 1902, quite a difference.
Look at the false-fronted buildings,
sure.
Boardwalks.
Sure.
How many people?
About 600 people at that time, but it has all the amenities. Has a big school, has a church, has a hospital with a doctor, it has lawyers, it has four, not one, not two, not three, but 4 hotels. The Union Hotel, the Imperial Hotel, Frank Hotel, and of course the Miners Hotel. It has a bank. The Union Bank of Canada is there. It has a manager called Farmer, and Farmer's he's a bit of a nervous manager. There is actually a Northwest Mounted Police a constable in town, a guy called Laird, Robert Bruce Laird, and the town is a tough town. You have your usual miners' brawls on Saturday night, and you have poker, and you have pretty heavy drinking, and the bank manager is nervous because he brings in 125,000 silver dollars every month to meet the payroll.
Yeah, that would be with one police officer around. But Canada's notoriously peaceful, though, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, generally speaking.
With a small P.
But he thought this might be the exception. He sleeps above the bank, but he sleeps not alone. He sleeps with 4 revolvers, and 4 revolvers loaded. Yeah. So, and the reason why he has them all loaded, because he thinks if he's attacked, he may need more than 6 shots. On the other hand, he may need 12, he may need 18, he may need 24.
And he doesn't want to waste any time reloading.
Precisely.
So
may not get the time
Mr.
to.
Farmer, the bank manager.
Yeah, and there's some interesting characters in town. There's Mormon Bill, and there's the Benton Kid, and there are some other characters. A lot of miners had nicknames, and the town is kind of interesting, and they start to proceed, and the mine is really a good mine. That seam extends to about 30 feet, Mike, goes right under Turtle Mountain itself. So there's a rail track leading over there, going under Turtle Mountain, and there was some foreshadowing. Late in 1902, the miners noticed that some of their 2-foot wide beams had snapped in two overnight. Not only that,
moving underground.
Yeah, something even more disturbing. And it does happen in coal mines, something even more disturbing. They would excavate a 4-foot or 5-foot seam, come back the next day, that seam had closed tight.
Now, mines are dangerous places. I mean, can't conceive of working in a close confines. But when you see something like that happening, what would the average miner do? I mean, I guess he's got to get his pay somehow, and this is standard procedure to see this kind of stuff?
Yeah, he keeps on working. He works 6 days a week, and usually a 10-hour day.
Yeah.
So he's used to that. He's used to the bumps. It's a dangerous business, you know. I mean, they had explosions in the mines, and so really it was difficult.
You've got a great artifact here for that, by the way. I mean, when I think of all the methane gas and all sorts of other gases that are given off in mines, this was one of the safety lamps, and it's just so beautifully made. What a solid piece of equipment.
Yeah, well, of course, the original safety lamp was designed in England, the Davy lamp, and this is the Davis lamp, actually, and beautifully made. Of course, about 1 million coal miners around the world, probably at that particular time. So this meant they would get away from most of the explosions.
All right, and so they were using these, but gosh, when the entire world you're living in is shifting, what a nerve-wracking circumstance. Any other foreshadowing?
Well, yeah, a couple of strange things happened. On April the 28th, 1903, at the top of the mountain is a guy called Rail Green. He's a surveyor, and he has a surveyor's helper there. And ordinarily they'd survey, they're looking for a new railroad to come into town because the mine was doing well and the town was doing well and the 600 inhabitants were happy and all, and everything was going swimmingly. And ordinarily they just ducked their equipment in the timber up at the top of the peak.
And they'd be carrying stuff like transit and things. You've got this here. These are chains? Is this what this is?
Yeah, these are chains, surveyor's chains.
Surveyor's chains. Each one of these links, hand-forged, and that's what they measured the country out in.
Sure. And they carried a lot of equipment.
Yeah.
So ordinarily, they're not going to carry that equipment all the way down to one of the hotels. They're probably staying in the Union or the Imperial, and they weren't going to bother. But this one night, 28th of April, note the date, 5:30, he says to his helper, I think we'll take the equipment down to the hotel tonight. Well, his helper, his assistant is just absolutely flabbergasted. They've never taken the equipment down before at all. He said, well, Mr. Green, he said, this means packing all the equipment down the hill. And it's a lot of work.
And coming
guess
up
who's going to do most of the work, right?
That's right.
And but Green insists. No, he says, I don't know. I think we'll just take it with us tonight. So he painstakingly takes them a lot longer to go way down that north peak, over the side, down the hill, carrying all their equipment, and they put it in the hotel. Yeah. And at the same time, there's a little shoemaker, a guy called John Thornley. And he has a little shop over there, and his sister has come up to stay with him to drink in the mountain air. She's not really too well. So she's going to leave the next day. And it's expensive to stay in a hotel. And he is a shoemaker, and money comes hard. And but he says, they're going to sit down to supper, and he says to his sister, he said, well, Ellen, he said, why don't we go and spend the night at the Frank Hotel? Oh, she said, that would be, we don't have to, we can stay here. Oh, I don't know. He says,
let's celebrate a bit.
Yeah, I just feel that, well, let's go over to town.
Yeah.
They packed up and went over to town, stayed in the Frank Hotel, and of course it saved them. Same time, almost the same time. Night shift goes on into the mine. 20 miners go in. One of them is a guy called Dan McKenzie. And they're going right into the bowels of the mountain. They're in probably about 1,500 feet, I think, at that time. Yeah. And working away, and they've done this for over about 1.5 years, so they're quite used to it.
Graveyard shift. They go in the evening, and they're, what are they working, 12 hours or something like that?
Yeah, and they go right into the mine, and they stay in there, and I think it was probably from 5 o'clock, they probably took a 5 o'clock shift. No, excuse me, they went in later. Probably took an 8 o'clock shift, worked till about 4 in the morning or 6 in the morning, something like that. 10-hour shift, probably. And at the same time, this is about 4 o'clock in the morning, two of the miners who went into the mine came out of the mine to have lunch at the tipple. So there are 17 miners inside. There's the tipple master plus the 2 miners sitting out there, and a mogul backs up. And the engineer in charge of the mogul has a locomotive. It's mostly almost exclusively used in coal mines and sometimes in sawmilling operations. And in charge of the mogul is the engineer called Ben Murgatroyd. And he has two brakemen, actually, a guy called Sid Choquette, and the other guy's name is Lowe's. I don't know his first name. And they back up to the tipple and they load on, and remember, it's pitch black at night. It's 4 o'clock, just after 4 o'clock, the day after, the 29th of April.
29th of April.
So they've done this 100 times. They've probably done it 1,000 times. Doesn't make any difference. And suddenly, Murgatroyd hears falling rock. Doesn't hear much, but hears some rock coming down the slope. He says, boys, jump on. Both of them jumped on. Choquette and Lowe's jumped onto the handrails, jams home the throttle, takes off down the slope much faster than he should have, Then he hears the rock starting to cascade down. Then he hears a huge explosion. Sounded like the end of the world. 70 million tons of rock break loose. They are going, the rock is coming down like this. They're going down the track. The rock is approaching them. They go through one bridge. The bridge is destroyed behind them. They take off over the other bridge. The rocks hit the edge of it. They make it by 4 seconds. They make it by 4 seconds.
This Murgatroyd just had the sense something told him to gun it.
Yeah, very, very lucky. I mean, just had hesitation and they would have been done.
All those miners and the guy on the tipple, gone.
They're gone. Absolutely. Carried into eternity. Carried into eternity. Gone into
What about these miners? Because there's 17 miners still in the mountain.
Miners are still trapped in the mountain, but what happens next, before we get back to the miners, is that Choquette and Murgatroyd and Lowe's, they go to the company office. They meet the amount of policemen there, and they realize it's now 4:10, April the 29th, 1903. The Spokane Flyer, which is a CPR train, is heading towards the slide. They know, they're convinced, though it's pitch black outside, that the track is gone. They're going to barrel into this, could kill dozens of people. So he grabs his light, he grabs his lantern, and this is...
You got one of those lanterns.
Yeah, I have, actually.
This is the CPR lantern, like he would have grabbed.
Yes, except he would have had a red lamp on it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find my one with the red lamp. And he would have had a red lamp, which means stop, danger, don't go any farther. He takes off across a jumble of rocks. He can still hear the rocks coming down in the distance. Bang, 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 bang. Lowe's can't make it. He can't follow. He can't follow Choquette. Choquette's too fast. He goes over rocks and around rocks that are as big as houses. He goes for over a mile. And finally he comes out, pitch black. He comes out dead smack on the CPR track where it went right into the slide. We don't know to this day because it was absolutely pitch black. A few minutes later, he waves down the train as it comes in. And the CPR, to show his eternal gratitude, they gave him $25. And a letter. $25. $25 a letter.
Oh, they were a generous crowd, weren't they?
They were indeed.
So this guy he must have been directed by some divine hand to make his way. I mean, anybody who's even tried to make their way across a plowed field knows how tough it is.
Well, a number of things happened, actually, Mike. A number of things happened. When the slide came down, it went about over a mile wide, and it came right down the draw of what we call Gold Creek. And Gold Creek was the borderline between life and death. There was a little bit of minor subdivision at the end of it, and 23 people survived there, but some of them were propelled into eternity. And one thing that happened there was really quite remarkable. The Leach family was virtually wiped out. Father and mother were both killed. All 4 sons were killed. In the top of the building of the Leach family, in the upper story, was a tiny little girl called Marion Leach. She was a baby. When the slide hit, she was propelled through the window, evidently through the window of the house, right onto the rocks below. And what had happened is a bale of hay had come along from the livery stable, which was a quarter of a mile away, and it sat there. She flew through the air, came straight down, landed in the bale of hay.
And was saved. The only member of the Leach family
of the Leach family that was saved. And that's where many legends grew up around this. And of course, what happened, 23 people in that subdivision were saved. Most of them were killed. The rest in the main part of the slide were consigned to oblivion, 100 feet under the rocks. Just no chance at all. And if that slide had gone over another 7 or 8%, the whole town of Frank would have disappeared in a fraction of a second.
So there could have been the deaths of 600 people. How many people died in the slide?
76 that they know of. They think there may have been another 50 men looking for work on the outskirts of a town where men camped when they came to look for work. But they only found about a dozen of the bodies. So that's very, very hard to tell. Some were unnamed and some were unrecognizable. And what happened, of course, is that people, when dawn broke, they realized that most of that eastern part of Frank was simply gone. It was obliterated. But they also felt that all the miners in the mine were gone. And what had happened in the mine, in the middle of the night, around 4:10, they felt a huge shudder and heard a terrific explosion. The explosion was heard as far away as Cochrane. That's about 100 miles away. It sounded like a rifle shot, they said.
This is just the sound of the rock snapping.
Yeah,
was
snapping.
That what it...
Yeah, the mountain just caved in. And the guy in charge of the miners was not the shift boss, but he was a guy called Dan McKenzie. And Dan McKenzie had another guy with him, close friend, who knew the mine. And they felt this rumble, and some of them were thrown right against the wall, but it didn't cave in. Surprisingly, their tunnels did not cave in. They went down to the entrance, rushed down to the entrance. It was blocked. And the guy who knew the mine said there's 300 feet of rock out there. 300 feet. And you can do a lot with a miner's pick, but you can't go through rock. You can go through coal. So they started thinking about it. They were afraid of the afterdamp, which is the gas. They were afraid of losing oxygen. They were afraid of the river backing up, and all this was happening. There was gas in the upper parts. The river was backing up.
So the mine was filling with water.
That's right. They were sealed off from the outside. There was only one chance. He said, there is a seam that used to outcrop on the side of the mountain. Let's head for that seam and hope we can get out. So they worked at a very, very narrow seam. And most of the miners fell away as they lost their oxygen. 3 of them kept at it, Dan McKenzie and 2 helpers. And they were just ready to give up when their pick broke through at one of the bare places on the surface that had been swept clean by the slide. And they looked out, and it was about 12 hours later or 13 hours later, and they could see the devastation.
4 o'clock in the afternoon
about 4 o'clock
of that same afternoon.
Absolute devastation. And they ducked because the rocks were still coming down. Not as much, but they couldn't get out there. So they went up another little seam, and this other little seam gave them a huge protecting rock. And as they emerged and looked at this desolated scene, they saw 50 people down below, way off to the side, seeing if there was any way into the entrance, trying to get into the entrance. And of course, they came down the slope. And came down, and we have a picture of them as here they come up the town, and accompanied by all their so-called rescuers, although they rescued themselves, and they come into Frank itself.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So 17 miners that everyone had presumed to be dead are really alive.
Yeah.
So, but with 76 others dead,
yeah.
It must have been short and small joy out of that.
Yeah, what happened, of course, is they evacuated the town of Frank immediately, and that meant that no one was allowed in the town. They brought in 24 mounted policemen under Inspector Primrose, established a mounted police post on the other side of town.
We'll talk about that. Some of the things, the aftermath of the Frank slide right after this break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns, talking about the Frank slide in 1903. 1903. Yep. Well, the devastation obviously faced these people. As you mentioned just before we went to break, they evacuated the town. Yeah. And I guess it must have been a pretty somber spot to be.
Yeah, they still continued to search for survivors for a while, Mike. Of course, that was hopeless, indeed hopeless. The mounted police established a deadline, which meant that they sealed off the town of Frank, and no one was allowed in there. And deadline meant precisely that, deadline. If you went back in there as a looter, you were going to be gone. And so the mounted police stayed in there until they felt, and the first initial survey indicated that the town was probably safe. So people started coming back in, but just after the slide, something kind of interesting happened. 24th of May was the Queen's birthday in 1903. So a lot of people came out from Pincher Creek and Blairmore and all over Alberta on the CPR train to see actually what had happened there. And they're all standing there having their pictures taken in front of this massive slide. And 100 pounds of dynamite, which was thawing, went off. Most of those people had their back to the mountain, you see, because they wanted the mountain behind them. They thought the mountain was coming down. Some of them were 75 and 80 years old. They turned into world-class sprinters going back towards Frank. It was really very, very humorous. They said the people who watched it, there weren't many watching it. They were too busy running, by the way.
So a whole bunch of this was attracting a lot of attention from every angle.
Sure it was.
But they did. You have pictures of them actually remining, starting mining up again.
Yeah, they started back in again and mined till 1905, 1906, 7, 8, really into 1909, Mike. And the seam was still as good as ever, but the Dominion government wasn't too happy with it. So they sent back a team back in there in 1909 and 1910 and really examined that North Peak. The North Peak, they said, was fairly safe, but when that team went back in there, they found that some of the fissures or cracks in the earth had opened up, Mike.
Now, you've got a number of pictures here taken from, I presume, the National Geologic Survey, and here's one of those giant fissures that is just sticking out there. You can see compared to the size of the men.
And not only that, a fissure at the top, Mike, usually means it's much larger at the bottom. Now, that's right? Geologically, that usually happens. Yeah. So this is what happened. All along that North Peak, huge fissures were opening up.
And look at the trees in this shot.
Sure.
The camera is level.
The camera is level. The camera is level. You'd think it was taken on the angle, this shot. It is not. These trees are actually off at an angle, significant angle, because the whole earth shifted up there. Yeah. And it still shifted. So when the Dominion Geological Survey came back with that news and all the details they had, and they had maps of it showing that the slide had moved over a little bit, all of Frank would have gone. If the North Peak comes down, Frank, as it stood then, would disappear completely. So they gave word to the coal company, that's it. By then, H.L. Frank had died. Coal company decides to move out because they don't want to be responsible. They move out. Frank then subsides into a kind of a ghost town. A lot of the buildings are picked up and moved into Blairmore, elsewhere in Alberta, and really quite a fascinating part of Canadian history. I mean, 70 million tons, covered almost 2,000 acres.
The fact that it missed, I mean, that what great fortune that it missed the main part of town.
Yeah.
An immense tragedy. You know, I still, when I drove through there, I still don't want to come to a complete halt, you know? I mean...
I think it takes a brave individual to even walk up in the North Peak today. I would feel a little nervous about it, and I don't mind walking in the mountains, but I think with those huge fissures up in the North Peak, you just don't know when the rest of that mountain's going to come down.
Yeah. This photograph right here just really says it all to me, because this is a photo taken of Frank before the slide.
Yeah.
And down over in this corner, you see, this is the subdivision, the minor subdivision you
That's
were
right.
talking about.
Yeah.
And that's what all went. This whole mountainside
right.
here swept right out.
Came down in almost a straight line following Gold Creek. And, you know, there are all sorts of rumors about it, Mike. I mean, virtually everybody over there was killed except a few people in that subdivision. And you heard a rumor after Frank closed and after it was all gone that the bank was destroyed, the Union Bank. There was 100,000 silver dollars in the bank. Wrong. The Union Bank wasn't touched. Stood there as a derelict for years afterwards. So it wasn't touched. True, the railway did, you know, it did put through a new railway in there, and they did come across, and one of their steam shovels came across the remains of a house in doing so, and a baby's cradle, in fact, and some skeletal remains. And so that, you know, so a lot of rumors you hear about Frank are not correct. I would suggest, though, that the North Peak is still rather unstable, and certainly I think that massive monument to those people attests to the massive destruction that a slide can create.
That's the way we have to think about this. It's not just a rock slide. It's not just an exposed quarry. It is a tombstone. It is a monument to those people.
Yeah. It's essentially the coal miners of early Alberta.
It certainly struck fear into the hearts of anybody who was contemplating traveling through the mountains at the time, because I can remember my own sort of childish memories.
Yeah.
Gosh, we're going to go through the mountains. They could all come down on us. Remember what happened in Frank? That must have gone around the world.
Well, it did. It made headlines all over the world, and of course, much exaggeration. A lot of the writers used their vivid imagination and said the whole town had been wiped out, and there was only one survivor, and that was Marion Leach, and it goes on and on and on, and all the rumors that started and have carried on actually over the years. Excellent story, though, and you can head right by it when you head on the Southern Trans-Provincial. The Indians wouldn't camp in the bottom. The seams were closing up. A great story. Join us again for another Gold Trails and Ghost Town. Bye-bye.